Picture this. You and the homies got some shiny rocks and found yourselves on an island. You go exploring, fight some goblins and some wolves, and make your way up to some weird shrine. You go in, slay undead, but one of the bros die. You try to find shelter, but a door is locked. You need to go to the city. Unfortunately, on the way back, another bro got kicked in the head by a horse, and now you have two homies down. You explored every nook of this island, but you need to get to the church. Quickly. You make it safe into town and bring the boys back. You need to get some better gear so you can try to explore the shrine again. You give your mages magic, get a sharp new rapier or two, and go to leave, except you can't. The king's men are all standing at the exits. This doesn't seem out of place for the townspeople. You talk to them and hear about a Lucan, a prophecy, someone begging you to go rescue a princess. You meet a very forward dancer in town square, but nothing is making sense. You have no choice but to try and make it past a guard to leave, but he searches you and demands that you go to the king at once. Then this is what you hear. I admit, I am being a little pedantic, but bear with me. We're told in the opening demo about a prophecy and that we are the four travelers that have a crystal. It's evident that we aren't from here, but how are we not from here? We are on an island. The only way to actually get on the island is by boat, and we don't have one. There's a bridge, but it's broken. Then, when you experience bad luck and need to rest, you're prevented from leaving. I don't know about you, but if I went to a country with my friends and our rock collection, and then was told I was being taken to see the king, I'd be very uncomfortable. And yet, we're greeted with a noble and pleasant tune. If a band was playing this song when I walked in, it would make me feel at ease. Then, the king says, "Since you have those rocks, go and save my daughter. Do this, and I'll allow you to leave my island." Very suddenly, I don't feel so calm anymore. Not to mention that his best soldier stole his daughter, and despite having at least 10 soldiers in the castle, says that they are incapable of doing so. Essentially, the king just blackmailed us into a potential death sentence just so we can maybe have the chance to get out of this prison island. This should be Australia Castle. Anyway, I've looked really deep into this, and this causes me to have some differing opinions on the feeling of the music for the castle. It in no way has anything to do with the fact that my rendition ended up very aggressive sounding to the point I needed to look for some justification. Absolutely not. As far as the original music goes, it does capture the feeling that you're in the presence of royalty. But why? The first instruments that you hear are strings, likely a cello or a viola, and a harpsichord. Harpsichords were invented sometime in like the 13 or 1400s and were a staple in music we consider classical today. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that whenever we're presented with scenes from movies or shows that detail time several hundred years ago, a harpsichord could be heard. I don't have any examples to offer you to back this up, but I reckon that over time, exposure to aristocrats and monarchy in conjunction with music relative to the era has conditioned us, or me at least, to correlating royalty and a harpsichord. That harpsichord is playing arpeggios while the strings play a melody that seems cautious. It avoids anything too abrupt and just goes with the flow. Even when the snare comes in, it seems as if the entire band is playing in that same room you're meeting with the king, and therefore they can't be too loud as to not interrupt what's being said. As a side note, I fear that this amount of thinking is detrimental if done on a constant basis. You can literally explain whatever you want, however you want to, provided you give yourself enough time to convolute everything. What I don't feel as a result of my own convolution is that the music in Cornelia Castle can benefit from a little more pizzazz. In conjunction with what I said earlier, I'm wanting to go in a different direction. I want to have something presented to the player that provides tension. You're being asked to risk your life, and it is the only way you're going to be let off the island. But there are other things to keep in mind. This castle doesn't always have to feel like a scary place to be. Once you rescue the princess, you know nothing bad could ever happen to you here. She even gives you a sick lute to shred on later. The king abides by his promise and builds the bridge to get you off the island. Not to mention that the music that plays when that bridge is being built is just a more playful version of this song. This entire sequence of events is just a small quest you completed, your first vanquished enemy, your first successful mission. The music first presented alongside a hill to climb, then is next presented when you have successfully climbed it. The music I intend on writing is going to serve a couple of different purposes. Firstly, I wanted to provide the atmosphere for what we talked about when first meeting the king. Secondly, I want it to provide the atmosphere of success in vanquishing a foe. Instead of it staying the anthem of the castle, I want it to be the player's anthem to mark their first victory of the game. I want it to feel like your theme because you own that castle now. This may be easier said than done. I wanted my version to have a strong rhythm to start off. The only practice I've had with this is from the overworld theme, so I begin by borrowing a little bit of staccato horns from there. I say begin, I've clearly arranged the whole song before I've written this script. In trying to create a rhythm that meets my goals, I tried a couple of variations, but ended up with one that has brass playing 3 notes per measure. In the sequence of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, where and is the upbeat, I have notes on 1, then 2, with the last on the upbeat before 4. Here's an example where the snare drum is emulating the main 1, 2, 3, 4, which makes it a little easier to tell that the last note is on the upbeat. Even though my instrument choice for explanation is a little questionable here, what's more important is understanding my perspectives with upbeats and rhythm. It's very common to hear drums that play something like this. The kick drum is played on every main beat, and the snare is played on every other main beat. Hats routinely get played in my definition of the upbeat area. For this next little example, I'm going to use a track I wrote called Death's Euphoria. In one of the main melodic sections of the song, this is the sequence of drums being played. Together with music, this is how it sounds. This drum loop uses the snare in the upbeat, and it tends to provide a ton of energy to the overall sound. Compare that to the same music, but with the snare moved to being on the downbeat. Why does it sound so different? Upbeats don't only exist with percussion, it exists across every method of timekeeping across every instrument. Placing focus on the upbeat fills that time with something that's normally not emphasized. This is what I think provides some of that energy. It also helps that in this example, the melody itself is written to match the upbeat snare so that it complements the percussion. The point being, utilizing this upbeat should provide a little bit of energy to the track. Using all upbeats would be a little too energetic for what I'm looking for, and the contrast in the rhythm is much more interesting than a 4-to-the-floor equivalent. Now that we have a rhythm established, we need to work on some supporting low end, which leads me on a little rant. Working with low end of audio is a difficult thing to do. Writing harmonies in the bass area is almost impossible once you get down into certain ranges of audio. Here's an example of a simple 2-note combination played on a tuba, then on a trumpet. Each and every sound we hear all have specific frequencies. A common fact that gets shared is that the extent of human hearing is from 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. Each and every note that we use in music comes out of speakers at a specific frequency. I pulled up this wonderful chart, link in the description, to illustrate some of the difficulties we hear. In our example, I played the notes B and G in the range of each instrument, meaning different octaves of one another, which is noted on the chart with a little number to the bottom right of the note name. The higher that number, the higher the octave and therefore pitch the sound is. For the tuba, we look at the frequencies of G1 and B1 and see that they're 49 Hz and 61.74 Hz respectively, the difference between the two being 12.74 Hz. For the trumpet, we look at the frequencies for G4 and B4, which are 392 Hz and 493.88 Hz respectively, the difference being 101.88 Hz. It's pretty obvious that the notes played on trumpet are clearer and just in general sound better when played together versus the two notes that played on the tuba. When the frequency difference between two notes gets to be too small, the overall sound becomes too muddy and/or dissonant. It's sort of the same principle as to why notes played side by side don't sound very clean. If we take that same B4 the trumpet is playing and try to play an A sharp, the difference in frequency between those two notes is 27.72 Hz, making it very close to the difference between the notes played on the tuba. There are a ton more questions about how and why this works or doesn't work, and I could probably make an entire video about just this. If you want to see that, please let me know in the comments. For these reasons, my bass frequencies tend to be a bit basic with just a simple octave difference between overlapping instruments. This is a combination of tubas, French horns, and upright bass. For the middle and treble section, I use violas and violins with minimal difference between the two. I was searching for a relatively straightforward first section, and here is that treble. I added in a little snare, and this is what it sounds like when it's all played together. Section 2 borrows from the first in tonality, but differs in a couple of areas. Let's start by looking at the melody. It sounds a bit off, doesn't it? Let's add just a little bit of help by adding in the counter melody played on violin. Honestly, I've been pretty happy with how a lot of these things I've written for this whole project have come out. I am thrilled with how these melodies work together. Here are all of the stringed instruments playing. Adding in the brass totally hammers the feeling home. I have trumpets and tenor trombones duplicated to match the melody, while horns and tuba play the counter melody. Having straight horns sounded a little boring, so I added a little bit of staccato on the trumpets and tenor trombones and used bass trombones sparingly to add a slight amount of ebb and flow. Here's what all of the brass sounds like. And this is all of Section 2. Section 3 is much simpler and much softer, and will be the blueprint that I have to write the music for the bridge repair. I used the standard 4 woodwind instruments to offer a significant contrast from what was previously heard while not entirely abandoning what I deemed to be a regal theme. Minus the harpsichord, of course. Maybe one day. The variation between instruments is more like Section 2 instead of Section 1. Bassoons and rubber chickens are stuck in a harmony role, attempting to work with a melody and a counter-melody played by flutes and squidwards respectively. First, here is the melody and counter-melody. Then here is just the harmony with the bassoons and rubber chickens. And when it's all put together, this is what we end up with. And finally, here is my full version of Castle Cornelia. How do you feel about my changes? Did I hit the target or did I miss the mark? And do you prefer that I elaborate on how each instrument or section comes together like I did here? Or is it better to be a little more concise? I think this gives a little more insight on how groups of instruments work together, but it's your opinion that counts. Thank you again for giving me some of your time. As always, please feel free to comment your thoughts. Good or bad, I always want to hear so I can improve what I'm doing. If this was interesting to you, please consider subscribing for the next video where I tackle the battle theme and probably the victory fanfare to go with it. That one's going to be a doozy. Thanks again, and see you soon.